wanted to introduce you all to the amazing Vivian Loftness, who today will be talking about her amazing work and research over the last 30 years on building technologies. Oh, okay. Thank you. On advanced building technologies and how they relate specifically to human health and environmental sustainability. And while I won't go into all of her amazing accolades in the architecture field, which are very, very numerous, and she's done amazing work with both developing LEED and Living Building Challenge, I do want to mention, because this is super impressive, that she's been on 10 National Academy of Science panels, and she's given 4 congressional testimonies to U.S. Congress on sustainability, which is pretty amazing. So we're really lucky to have her here today, and I hope you'll give her full attention, and please ask wonderful questions after the talk.
I debated whether to switch my talk altogether now that I've seen what Anna's graduate PhDs and master's students are working on, because you guys are doing amazing research, and so it's. I also am part of a PhD research, Master of Science and PhD research program, and we've done a lot of very diverse research in the area of building science and building performance and the next generation of sustainable built environments. But I'm going to talk today about one particular aspect of design, which has to do with the engagement of nature in architecture, and how we, in fact, need to go much more proactively engage nature, and then how we actually justify those actions. So I spent a lot of time looking, and I've been in this movement long enough to have been part of the passive design community, the bioclimatic design movement, the names that we've chosen to try to engage the notion of nature. And I finally ended up deciding to call it environmental surfing. It sounds like a lot more fun, and it's all about going out and finding what the environment is offering as natural conditioning. So let me talk through these really quickly. This is like story hour while you eat lunch, and hopefully with illustrations that will be compelling. So we are in a net zero economy. We're moving to a point where we have to design for net zero. We have to design for net zero land, net zero materials, net zero energy, net zero water. We're going to have to be doing this professionally across the board. And to do that, we have to celebrate climate, we have to celebrate culture, we have to celebrate region, and we have to balance deep conservation with dynamic embrace of natural conditioning. That's the only way we're going to get to zero. What we've been building, all these deep buildings, all the trapezoidal objects that are stacked books, everything that you guys are working on and looking at in the media, with very dark facades that are sealed shut, are not going to get us there. And so we're basically being challenged as professionals to find a new language, and find a language that's compelling visually. And this just gives you an idea of what it's like to be in a building that has a 30% or a 20% solar heat gain coefficient. You just don't want to be in that building because you're completely disconnected from the outdoors. Our buses are like that. You get into a bus, it's like this black tube, and you no longer look at the street, which means you're no longer engaging with the community that you live in. So it's very important for us to realize that we've got to move the needle, and we've got to move it fast. And we need to do it because it has significance for human health, it has significance for the environmental sustainability, and I'll come back to some of that. Inside those buildings are lots and lots of windowless spaces. And as soon as the power goes down, the only thing you can do in a windowless space is abandon ship, right? You have to leave the building. There's no way, it's dark, there's no air, there's no plug power, and you basically have to go out. Right? So we really have to fight the notion of windowless and basement spaces. I spent all my time on the design review committee at Carnegie Mellon trying to fight to have them not build a basement at all. Don't build it, because then you'll move people into it and it becomes a major living environment. So instead, we're going to design for environmental surfing. And what does that mean? Well, it means that we're going to look for what's in the specific climate that we're in, for natural heating, cooling, lighting. We're going to look at the water resources in the context that we're in for all the uses that we have for water. We're going to maximize local foods. We're going to look at materials that don't need transportation, that can be assembled locally. And we're going to reduce technological complexity. That doesn't mean we're going to eliminate it. We're going to reduce it and bring it just in time and where it's needed. So the innovation will arrive in a different way. So let me go through a few of the environmental surfing vehicles. free heat is one of the best things we can do. Sunshine, we still have in the United States predominantly heating-dominated buildings. I know we think cooling dominates in the U.S., but it does not. And now with lighting becoming much more energy efficient, heating is once again on the top of the chart as the most significant loads that we have in buildings. And yet we're blocking out the sun because we're afraid of cooling loads. A net zero building will free roll for somewhere between 25 and 75% of the time just by using passive solar heat. Anybody who has a solar house knows that the thermostat, now that you've got a Nest thermostat or an Ecobee, it'll immediately turn off when the set point is met in a sunny room, and you'll find that your set point is met a majority of the time. So we're definitely, if we can design for sun, we've got a free heating system for somewhere between a quarter and a quarter of the time. This is the office building energy use pattern. You'll notice that the system is off from May to September, and then it clicks back on. This is what happens when you do deep conservation. You can cut about 35% out of that, so that means we're really thinking about the thermal resistance of the windows. We're re-evaluating our window-to-wall ratio and the insulation of the roof and the walls. This is what happens when you throw passive solar on top of deep conservation. And we're at a point now where we can take this down to a very small level. And notice that the system is off now all the way from mid-October, or the system is off from mid-March all the way through mid-October. So we have a much longer period where we literally are not using a system at all. Conservation can reduce heating loads by, again, 25 to 75%. I'm sure all of you guys have been following the passive house movement. It has completely swept Europe and Scandinavia. I think you're going to see more and more passive house design, not just at the residential scale, which is where it began, but at the commercial building scale. We're even beginning to see passive house high-rise projects, and so this is about deep conservation. Just an example of a passive house with, obviously, a embrace of the sun on the south. So where the glass is all about sun, and this particular project in upstate New York is all about capturing the sun as a free heating source. Solar energy is the power of place. There's no question that if we design for sun, the dynamics of the physical environment we're in is totally different. And so I think it's really important for us to embrace sunshine, not only because it's a free heating source, but because it actually animates space and makes it precious and a destination. But there's also good research that's beginning to help make this case. This is an example of the kind of research that we've been gathering about health and productivity related to better built environments. This is a study that was done in a hospital. Hospitals are very good proving grounds for understanding the impact of environment on outcomes because they have measures of outcomes. So in this particular case, they were looking at length of stay for gynecology patients, and they found that gynecology patients that were in sunny rooms, so you go into rooms and you measure the amount of hours of direct sunshine they have, you look at the light levels in the rooms, and you compare outcomes among patients across, in some cases, across years. So you have lots and lots of data on how long did it take to recover from surgery, from childbirth, from what's the recovery rate. They also have been pulling up information that shows how quickly people recover or how much medication they use in hospitals. And there's a long record of medication requests from patients. And then again, you can look at sunny rooms and dim rooms, and you can start to see the pattern of difference. So there's good research. In our case, we're trying to turn this into something known as triple bottom line accounting or net present value calculation, so we can calculate a return on investment. So if you look at actually the cost of per bed for a hospital, and you look at the recovery rates and the ability to actually move more patients through the hospital, the payback is $10,000 per bed, and the cost for achieving this by designing an Alvar Aalto hospital, which is completely south and southeast facing. So if you look at the undulating Pino Sanatorium, it's all about sunshine. It's completely designed around the sun. So there's a cost consequence in terms of land use and building sizing that ends up having to be justified. And in this case, 1,000% return on investment would be a pretty good stock market investment. So would we all like to? There are certainly amazing buildings that use sunshine as the defining factor. This Cambridge library by Bill Ron and Associates is all about the sunshine. Long southern face. It's a double envelope construction, and it is absolutely a destination in Cambridge. I mean, it's just filled with people all the time. You sort of wait in line in order to sit in a chair in the sun. And a very beautiful envelope design as well. Then there's environmental surfing for light. So net zero buildings will be designed for daylighting as the dominant light source, not as the sparkle, but as the dominant source, and all of the lights will be off. So it would be interesting to see how well this building performs if we turned off all lights and continued to work. Maybe not too badly, but there are a lot of buildings that would perform very badly if we turned off all the lights. So we need to rediscover the engineering and the art of effective daylight design. It is non-trivial. Daylight comes with glare, it comes with overheating. It's a non-trivial design problem. But somehow back in the Baroque time, they were able to design with very, very small apertures, brilliantly daylit spaces, right? And then in the case of the Saarinen Chapel at MIT, you can see a very small oculus creating an incredibly powerful daylit space. Very small sources can do a lot. This is what lighting demands are in the U.S. You'll notice there's almost no dip, right? So this is a commercial office environment. Lighting demand across the United States, and sort of typical days. And in the middle of the summer, we're using as much light as we are in the winter. So it has nothing to do with like the day. It literally has to do with the fact that we turn on all the lights all the time. If we do more efficient systems, we can cut that probably about 30. Actually, by now we can cut it 50 or 60% because LEDs have gotten so efficient at delivering light for wattage. Daylight, though, is where the real drama shows up. And using daylight, responsive lighting controls and occupancy sensors, and then designing around daylight, all of a sudden our loads drop dramatically. There are wonderful examples of architecture around daylight. This is the design of a classroom where brightness, contrast, and glare are solved by backlighting all the windows. So instead of just having punch windows and a facade, you're introducing, again, an oculus with dynamic louvers that can stretch. This is a Charlie Brown project out of the University of Oregon, a school in Oregon that basically does not need to have lights on during the daytime at all. There is good research that helps to justify this. This is an example of Maria Figueroa and Mark Ray at RPI looking at sleep related to circadian light. And putting orange glasses on a certain number of children in classrooms and finding out when you block the ultraviolet component of daylight, which is brilliant. I mean, daylight has got huge critical frequencies that actually become hormonal triggers for us. It resets our clock every day. Immediately tells us, that it's morning and it's blue light. It begins to give us serotonin, which suppresses melatonin, makes us alert. And then as the light turns more and more red late in the afternoon, it actually prompts melatonin, and then it helps us to fall asleep in a timely fashion. And in their studies, they were able to find that it improves sleep times by as much as 30 minutes in children. So if you're trying to get your kids to sleep at 8:30 at night, and it's then it's 9 and it's 9:30, in many cases it could be a lack of exposure to circadian light. And this is changing education. People are now beginning to shift outside recess to early in the morning. They're basically trying to get kids as much light into their eyes, and even through the window glass, the light triggers the appropriate hormonal response. So there's good research to talk about how much we need daylight, and the importance of really designing for it. So this is what airports look like in the past, and this is what airports that are designed around daylight look like today, right? So we really have to be sure, and again, when I walk into an airport, I spend far too much time in airports. The real question is not just does it have windows, does it have effective daylighting, and are the electric lights off? And they are, in this Cesar Pelli airport, the lights are off, except for the minimum required security lights, which are a very odd code requirement that mandates, a critical number of lights be on at all times in case of flood. But anyway, daylight is an amazing driver of form and detail, but you have to balance, you have to solve the glare and brightness contrast, and of course the overheating. You've got to know exactly what you're doing. And So we're environmentally surfing for heat, we're environmentally surfing for daylight or light, and now we're also environmentally surfing for air and for natural cooling. And I bundled these, although there's a whole lecture on both of them. So net zero buildings will be naturally ventilated. They will have windows. I was saying last night at dinner, as far as I'm concerned, you cannot call yourself an environmental building if it's sealed. You just can't. You can't, again, you'd have to abandon ship when the power goes out. You can't stay in a building that has no light and has no air. So we're ultimately starting to rethink how we design buildings so we can get air moving through the buildings. And while we're doing that, we re-engage people with the natural setting. This is our ventilation load in the American office environment. It is, again, a flat load. We turn on the air. For all occupied times, we leave it on all year round in commercial office buildings. This is what you would need in a naturally ventilated building on the assumption that it was a climate that was too hot and humid. You would end up turning on your air systems. You know, these universities that you're at predate central air systems. They predate air conditioning, right? They amazingly educated hundreds of years of people successfully without having central air conditioning. So they were predominantly winter education. They started in September, they ended in May, and ultimately they knew that this was the time when nature would provide them with adequate breathing air. So even the lecture rooms were designed around natural ventilation and free cooling. Fill them up with students, open the windows, and you can provide cooling. The cooling loads in American office buildings, obviously they do surge in the summer. This is what conservation will do. Unfortunately, the only conservation tool that we have right now is dark glass. Pretty pitiful because, of course, it cuts out the light and the heat. So we really need to think about dynamic solutions that would cut out the heat and light and would allow for the heat. If we design around natural ventilation with some form of mixed mode mechanical, I'll come back to mixed mode, and we introduce night ventilation, our loads go down even further. And again, there's beautiful examples of dynamic shading, the tree being the best because it knows exactly when it gets too hot and it leaves, and it knows exactly when it starts to get too cold and it drops its leaves. So it's the perfect, if you want to grow food on your facade, it'll know exactly when to shade the facade, so it's different. You can also do a lot of other forms of dynamic clearing. Natural ventilation can displace somewhere between 20 and 40% of cooling and 70% of the breathing air needs that we have in buildings. There is research on the importance of natural ventilation, most of it coming from Europe, because Europe has no tradition of having forced air in their buildings. They actually have no tradition of air conditioning, so they're basically all of a sudden saying, whoa, it's getting hot in Europe in the summer, we're going to have to install air conditioning. If we do that, are we going to start introducing breathing air and then leaving it on 7x24x365? So big studies, and there's a whole community of researchers that are desperately trying to figure out, do we need to supply air, how much air, and how much conditioning does that air need to have? This was a study done in France in a series of buildings where they looked at healthcare outcomes relative to buildings that had air conditioning, buildings that had just mechanical ventilation, and buildings that had natural ventilation. And they found there was a significant lower health cost in buildings that were naturally ventilated than there were in the mechanical conditioning. So it basically is beginning to make the case that we actually need that air. Just like we need circadian light, there is something in the fresh air that the mechanical system is not emulating. We don't know what the components are the way we do with light. We know a lot more about the circadian light impact on the human eye, but we don't know much about fresh air impact on the human lung. So there's a whole area of research that's necessary for us to make the case to let people open windows again. Because we probably can't package that same content and variability in the mechanical duct. There are amazing examples of naturally ventilated spaces, and they cross every building type. So here is a open-air shopping mall, right? It just happens to be the Milan Galleria, but it's a very hot climate in the summer, an incredibly rich place to spend time and a beautiful space. And this is, of course, what you would have seen in Denver, Colorado, as the emulation of the shopping mall, right? Which has now been torn down. But ultimately, we had a very different idea about what made retail viable. This is a convention center in Cape Town, Here's the old convention center in Washington, D.C., which has since been torn down. Very different attitude, dark glass, completely sealed, totally internalized, in contrast to this one, which is at least 30 to 40% of the total square footage has been taken out of the conditioned envelope. So you're in an open air environment for dining, for reception, for coffee, for stairs, for all the circulation corridors and all the pin-up space for vendors. You're in an open air environment, and then you go into a mechanically conditioned. This is what mixed mode is. It says we're going to do a little of both. We are going to provide air conditioning where we need it, but we're going to basically use natural conditioning where it's not. Schools with natural ventilation. Unfortunately, this is not the norm in the United States. We're literally moving away from windows that open, while most of Europe and Scandinavia is moving towards the notion that most of the year we're going to rely on natural ventilation. Probably one of the most effective night cooling buildings in the world. This is, of course, Gaudi's Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. And Gaudi was amazingly brilliant when he increased the surface mass in the airstream. So high stack effect, incredible airflows. You open the doors at night, the air flows through and up and out all these oculuses. And in the process of doing that, it goes across all of these crenellated components, which act as thermal capacitance or mass. And it pre-cools the whole structure. So the next day when you close the doors and people flood in to visit this incredible, it's actually a cool environment without air. So this is where we are in the American office world, the commercial world, and this is where we could be if we could just get deep conservation and passive conditioning. This is where we are. This is where we could be. Now I can do renewables. Now I can get to net zero. Now I can put in enough solar PV and wind and other things to be able to meet those loads. Do it if I keep designing this stuff. No way. You just can't plaster enough PV on the roof. So I want to introduce into this context the notion of biophilia. I think you guys know about this because Stephen Keller, for many, many years, was the voice of the biophilic architecture and, of course, the Youth Joint Degree Program. The important thing to understand is that it's all about embracing living systems, and it's not just the environmental surfing for building conditioning, it's also the water and the food and the mobility side of the equation. Most of you know, or should, if you don't, know what Keller's key design elements are, and they focus on environmental features and natural shapes and natural patterns, light and space, place-space relationships, and evolved human-nature relationships. The other source of the biophilic design movement that seems to be driving professionals to rethink their practice is the work at Terrapin, and they have published 14 patterns of biophilic design, all of which can be downloaded from the web. It's completely free, and there's a very strong overlap between this and the WELL standard, between this and, of course, Stephen Keller's work. And so we start to see now threads of environmental surfing showing up in practice through the work of Stephen Keller and Bill Browning and others. The research that's behind this is what I've been working on and with a group of graduate students, every successive generation of graduate students for probably about 15 years now. And the research is pretty solid about natural ventilation in views and daylight and sunshine. It's growing in the need for thermal variability. I'll come back to that. And it's certainly solid in the need for allowing people to have physical access to nature. What we don't know is how critical are the sounds of nature, the smells of nature, the sensory feel of nature, the use of natural materials. We don't have the body of research that would tell us how critical are these other factors, including the one that the importance of craft in the human hand that I know Ken Bloomer and others here at Yale have been very focused on, which is very much part of the biophilic. So 15 years of research, we've got about 700 research papers from all over the world, and we're beginning to see patterns that we think are actionable. So this becomes our pattern book. We're saying, look, we have to increase outside air. We're underserving the occupants of buildings through the mechanical systems that we've got. There's research that shows, if this is a study of 54 elementary schools, they found 14% improved standardized math when the ventilation rate was higher than 4.5 liters per second, in contrast to conventional 2.25. So they doubled the ventilation rate, and all of a sudden kids perform better. So we know we need this breathing. It's becoming clear that we have to get air to the nose, because right now we're blowing it somewhere in the vicinity of everything. It's like, blow it in there and it'll get to you. And well, it doesn't. It doesn't get to you for lots of reasons. There's lots of eddies and migratory patterns within offices. So providing task air, and this is a controlled experiment where Kosmatrek introduced individually controlled task air and found that there was about a 25% reduction in headaches among workers. And you start to see ROIs, so we can start to pay for task air. It's not cheap to put in task air. It's at least $800 per employee. By the way, when you buy a car, to get his, hers, and the kids in the back controls in the car, you're paying about a $200 premium on the car for all of that. But in an office building, the premium is much higher, because we do not have a tradition of providing localized control. We're basically blasting both thermal and air somewhere in the vicinity of 100 feet. It's clear that the research is telling us to open the windows, to use natural ventilation. This is the Preciosi study we already talked about. It's clear that we need to start getting back temperature control. Some of the most critical research, David Wyan, has looked at what impact does temperature have on creativity, on repetitive tasks, looking at all different types of human tasks, and found that thermal comfort control is critical. Nature is dynamic and buildings are static. We light basically to 500 lux. I would imagine we've got probably about 500 lux uniformly from one end of this space to the other end of this space, except where daylight is adding more. We're just literally just washing uniform light, which makes this not a very exciting space. If you start to think about the variability of nature, you want to start to think about where do we vary light levels. We design air temperature to hit 72 degrees year-round and never change. It doesn't matter if you're wearing a sleeveless dress and it's summer, or you're wearing, boots and 3 layers of wool and it's winter. The set point for the facility managers is 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're now exporting that all over the world. Well, what does that do to the human body to be continuously, irrespective of nature outside? We have airspeed that never varies from in some cases, almost negligible. So we're literally trying to, whereas nature is very, very dynamic. So there's a new field of emphasis called alliesthesia that seems to be now driving actually the standards. So ASHRAE has begun to create a dynamic standard for temperature control if you have airflow. So there's a movement that's occurring that's changing the way in which we practice, where we're actually designing dynamic environments instead of static environments. So we could mechanically vary the temperature, or we could just turn off the HVAC and live outdoors when the weather is right. Let the walls of your buildings open up, turn it into a pavilion, and live outdoors for a period of time. And if it's only for 6 weeks, 6 weeks is a lot, right? So we're basically, and every climate is going to be different in how long those are. Of course, if you're in very benign places like Honolulu, it's probably 6 weeks that you need to be locked up, and all the rest of the time you can have it. The research is there for maximizing views. In fact, this is stronger than daylight. It looks as if the visual connection to the outside. The most famous study is Roger Ulrich's study. This is the Hesham Mahone study of a SMUD call center, and they found that there was a 6 to 7% improvement in their productivity when they had seated views of nature. And they went and measured every workstation and measured productivity of individuals in a large call center. And call center employees are $5,000. Imagine living on that in Northern California, where SMUD is. And of course, they would never give them a window with a view because that costs too much money. And except 6 to 7% would pay for it. If you have that much impact on the performance of your call center workers, you could actually pay for their view. And that's where ROI calculations are so critical. You can see here we have a 300% return on investment at $1,000 a workstation. Making daylight dominant. This is the Choi study I talked about. This is where I work. This is the Intelligent Workplace. It's a living lab at Carnegie Mellon. We're looking at what's the changing nature of work and what are the kinds of physical environments that make better work. It is a completely day-lit environment. We do not turn the lights on during the day unless it's stormy. And we have great views over campus. I mean, it's a great, everyone who comes there says, oh, I wish I worked here. Right? And we wish they did too, actually. Celebrating sunshine. Again, this is the impact on medication use. They found 22% reduction in medication use when patients were in sunny rooms as compared to dim rooms. The Enzyme building is right now empty, and I've tried to go show my students, and I don't know what's been bought out of this enzyme. So here's your this is nature, right? This is what nature does in terms of the frequency of light and the color of light. Of course, the lighting world is going to match it. You can make any light fixture emulate daylight, and you can put carbon shades on all your kids at night so they don't get the blue trigger that keeps them awake. Or we could just design around daylight, right? Just would be a better design objective. The research is getting to be very strong about separating ambient and task, so we want lighting variability, which means we're dimming the ambient light a lot, and we're putting on task light for removal. I think at this point we could turn off all the lights in this space, right? Because we don't need, there's no task that you're doing that needs this light level, right? And I don't need it, and the screen doesn't need it, right? So we basically, though, been so driven for so long with uniform, high-level lighting. Shaker and Shaker found very strong correlations between headaches and access to task lighting, and lower ambient. The General Service Administration, who we've been working with for the last 15 years, has now rewritten all their standards, and they're doing about 200 lux ambient light everywhere and providing task lights where it's needed. And they've changed from 500 lux down to a dramatically lower, because the computer is its own light source, so unless you're doing paper-based work, we're definitely seeing the research literature on physical activity and design, the active design guidelines, which is another completely downloadable design standard from the web, amazing design standard. The research is pretty solid to talk about how valuable it is to get people physically moving. And this is a Chicago field study of 17 kids. In this case, they were looking at having them walk in a park as compared to walking in a built urban setting. We found that they had significant improvement in their performance. And these are kids with learning disabilities or with ADHD. Which brings me to ensuring the access to nature. So this is where biophilia and environmental surfing come together. Right? We're really trying to think of all the ways in which nature can condition, and then we're trying to re-engage nature in the space itself. This study in Georgia of schools went back and looked at all the playgrounds in a series of 14 schools and scored them based on their landscape diversity, their three-dimensionality, the students' engagement with the actual natural setting, many of the biophilic standards that Stephen Keller would talk about of prospect and refuge and creativity, and found that there were significant achievement increases among students who had three-dimensional, highly engaging playgrounds. And when we're outside, we all of a sudden rebuild community and collaboration. So that feeds back to making stronger solutions altogether. So what about tough climates? This sounds like a perfect thing to do for Honolulu and LA, and what about complex buildings? What if I'm designing a hospital? And I want to show you two projects, just to give you a sense that we can do tough climates and we can do complex buildings, right? So this is the spaceship, right? This is what we're designing right now. Build a skin, do whatever you want with the skin, and then blast systems inside to keep it, heated, cooled, ventilated, lit, plugged in. That we need inside the spaceship. The future is going to be mixed mode. So complex buildings are going to do both. They're going to basically use daylight and they're going to do electric light. They're going to design a lecture hall around daylight. I was really pleased to see Croom Hall. The lecture room is a completely, you could turn off all the lights and perfectly see the screen. Everyone could sit there and take notes. No electricity was needed at all. Although they turned on automatically when you walk in the room, which it wasn't necessary, right? They could not turn on automatically. There's a lot of examples of buildings in which daylight and electric light cohabitate. The idea is to make daylight dominant. Natural cooling and mechanical cooling. So a lot of major big buildings are shifting to a percentage of the building that is completely naturally ventilated, not air conditioned at all, and a percentage of the building. So, universities in Singapore, all of the circulation, all of the fire stairs, all of the elevator cores, even the lunchtime eating spaces are taken out of the conditioning room. It's only when you go into a blast room that you're in the conditioned space, right? So they're basically saying, nature, we're okay at 5 degrees and 80% relative humidity as long as it's a temporal place. So they take a huge chunk of the building out of the program. This is a naturally ventilated retail store in Texas. This particular one is like Play-Doh. It's side by side, natural cooling for some of the store and natural ventilation for much of the rest of the store. So they literally have designed around it. Of course, the whole notion of eating outdoors, most of us go to a grocery store, we eat indoors behind a sheet of glass. Like outdoors is not safe to eat in or not desirable. Natural ventilation and mechanical ventilation. Please do not preheat your thermal conditions and your ventilation solutions in the same duct. Take them apart. Absolutely, the future is to get ventilation. It's in Texas, where some of these projects are, 1/14 of the duct size is for breathing air. So 13/14 of the duct is for cooling, and this little itty bit is for breathing, and it gets completely lost in the shuffle. You don't even know if you're getting the breathing air. It's that little bit that's thrown in on the side, and it may or may not be getting to you. And ultimately, if you do a dedicated ventilation system, and then you do thermal conditioning with water, or with electricity or with other forms of distributed thermal, you have a totally different solution set. And now we can begin to survive. So resiliency is dependent upon us beginning to think through this. So we want natural ventilation to be independent, ventilation to be independent from thermal conditioning, and we want natural ventilation to cohabitate with mechanical ventilation. So if there's a haze in Singapore and you can't breathe the outside air, that's when you want mechanical ventilation. But when there's not a haze and the outside air is perfectly viable breathing, then you want to use the outside air itself. And then we want to mix our indoor and outdoor living, working, playing spaces. We want to literally, I'm sort of intrigued to watch the badminton right here. I'm just wondering if you could have had an outdoor badminton space right there. They could have just tripped right outside, enjoyed badminton, and come back in. And in that moment, all of a sudden, the whole vibrancy of your human systems would have been re-upped, right? I mean, it was probably re-upped playing in here, but it was not half as good as providing those directly adjacent work, learn, and play spaces. The research is beginning to mount up. So this is just a collective of research specifically around natural conditioning, window views, ventilation, daylight, and plants. And what we do with this is we turn these into these triple bottom line. So it's a triple net present value calculation. You start by doing your classic, so how much energy do I save? And that's part of my whole profit question, because I'm spending money on energy. Then you do a planetary calculation to say, well, if I switch to natural ventilation, what does it do for carbon reduction, SOx and NOx reduction because of the electricity generation and forcing air through spaces? And then you look at the people side of the equation and you say, how much research can I find? And you do a triple net present value calculation. You can all of a sudden show that instead of taking 15 years to pay back, it goes to 13 years and then it goes to 2 years, right? Human benefits are so. Okay, I want to give these two examples, and I'm going to close out. I hope we'll have big time for Q&A. So hospitals. Really, you want to do naturally conditioned hospitals? I do. And there are two hospitals in Singapore that are breathtaking, that are new. The Enteng Fong Hospital, which is Studio 505 out of Melbourne, and HOK out of San Francisco. Every bed has a garden and windows doors that open. So the beds sit in a series of niches. It's almost like an oak leaf pattern. And you literally, in your bed, you lean over and you open the jalousies and the air flows across the bed. And they flow straight through the corridor and out through a series of courtyards. So they've completely figured out how to make sure that the airflow is in the appropriate direction. And it's just amazing, the freshness of the air. Now, in the Singapore system, you have public insurance, and if you can't afford to, you buy private insurance on top of it. So 75% of the beds in these hospitals are public assistance beds, and 25% are public assistance with an added insurance payment, so that you can buy into an air-conditioned, sealed hospital, and they do. And when you walk from the 75% of the hospital that's naturally ventilated into the air-conditioned side, you can smell that you've moved into a hospital when you walk into that seal. It's just perfectly evident as soon as you walk across that line where you are. This is the other biophilic hospital. These have all been finished in probably the last 6 years. These are big, complex buildings in difficult climates. This is not a trivial climate to be doing this. And it's called the KTPH hospital. 75% of the rooms are naturally ventilated. They do their own food production on the roof, which is truly impressive. The central garden and the lobby is completely open air. I'll show you pictures of that. And then the 25% of rooms that are people pay a premium for are mixed mode. They're not sealed and air conditioned. They're mixed mode, so you get a choice. If you open a window, the mechanical goes off. Close the window, you can have the mechanical on. So people can decide based on the day and how they feel what they want. This is the lobby. You get dropped off here, whether it's by car or bus or by bike. You come through. This is the lobby is just an amazing space. And this, I talked to the woman who sits in this space, and she used to be in one of those sealed hospitals with, you walk in the lobby, and I said, well, how do you feel? Because you're out here in this 85-degree Fahrenheit space with a breeze. She says, oh, I love it. I mean, not only I feel better every day, everybody who comes to talk to me is so much nicer. And so she basically argues that she's got the best workplace, certainly for a receptionist at a hospital in Singapore. Circulation corridors, there's all the food stalls, so it's all the food vendors are right here in the open air, shaded because it's sunny and hot, right? and rainy at times. The stairs, the escalators, they're all open air. Everything is outside. The stairs are coated with messages, so you feel like you want to walk the stairs, and you can see how many bikes are brought to bear. They have a very big deal they have to worry about in terms of daily drain, so there's a lot of detailing for daily drain, which is quite interesting. These are the jalousie windows for the patients. They are in shared rooms, so there's 6 beds in a room. Dynamic louvers for recognizing where the sun is. They both slide and tilt, so there's a lot of capability to modulate based on the time of day and the season. Well, there's not much season, but time of day. Central courtyard, which is this oasis that feeds right into. So this is an open air bathroom. It's the nicest bathroom I've ever been to. It's just amazing. It's both private and breezy, and it's just brilliant space. Really amazing. The rooftop, because the mechanical system is tiny, they ended up having 2 empty roofs. So they have one roof out of these 3 wings that's mechanical. Because now they do dedicated ventilation, they do a water-based cooling, they do as much natural ventilation as they can, they've got a micro system, and it means that the other 2 roofs are these oases. And in fact, this woman who's 80 and a volunteer, she has a volunteer staff of a couple, I forget how many, but it's another 60, 70 people who come and volunteer, and they raise enough food on the roofs. See her production. This is a roof view. They raise enough food on the roof to give every patient a meal, 1 meal a week. And then they also have a community sale for fresh fruit and vegetables. If you look at these, this is a fruit. These are fruits that are being here. And they're training people on legumes and roots and leaves and fruits, and they literally are able to raise on what was once a mechanical henhouse production. The captured garden feeds right out into a reservoir, and they've been working on the reservoirs, like most American reservoirs, is sort of this antiseptic box, and they've been sort of re-engaging floating islands and things to clean up and sort of rehabilitate. And now they have blue herons, which they haven't seen. They haven't seen blue herons since, for about 50 years in Singapore, and all of a sudden they're finding a landing place and coming back. They have wonderful gardens, and this one they say you can these are plants that heal, thrill, and kill. So they have little labels, so you can wander around and find all the plants that kill and the ones that thrill you, and the ones that heal you. Right? So it's so engaging. It's become a destination for people all over the community. It's not just for hospital patients and their families. It's literally became a destination. This is one of the dining rooms with direct access to this particular garden. And as a consequence of this biophilic hospital, they now have this is their metrics of success. How many butterflies have we spotted at the KTPH hospital? And they put photographs. I mean, this is not a complete list. They're still adding. There's still space. You can see the empty spaces. This is how many birds have been sighted at the KTPH. This is how many fish. So it's just an amazing transformation of a very complex building with a huge agenda that's all of a sudden become biophilic and passive and actually sort of environmentally surfing for as long as it can. So that's KTPH. I'm going to do one more and then I'll close out, and most of it will be just images. So the Spheres in Seattle, this was one of the finalists for the Stephen Kellert Award this year at Greenville. This is an amazing project by NHBExYale. It's just interesting to look at their design process. This is the actual project. This was the neighborhood that they had to design for. This is the precedents they were thinking about. They wanted to re-engage plants and people, so their goal was to do something where the plants would begin to be added. They thought about putting the plants indoors in order to re-engage people. They thought about putting the building inside the plant shell, and they're literally trying to find the partie. And they ended up here, which was putting not the building, but the actual activities of an office building inside the plant shell. And lots of cases of iterative thinking about this project. Amazing graphics as they explored, and then they began to get serious about building these domes and looked at how domes have been built traditionally and what the actual manufactured component is, and came up with an idea that they felt was far stronger structurally and also more effective in terms of biophilic response, and developed the spheres, and then pre-manufactured, designed a whole series of different strategies, and then tested, mocked up, built on site, and then eventually erected. A destination that is going to definitely transform downtown Seattle. It is actually a place to go to work for individuals at Google. It's of course a destination for tourists and residents as well. They basically made the case to Google by going back to the various studies that we're talking about, looking at neuroscience studies, looking at health studies, and saying, exposure to plants makes us less emotionally volatile and makes us less error-prone, and even pictures of plants have a calming effect. Again, this is some of the research that we've talked about. As a bonus, they give off antiviral immune-boosting chemicals, phytoncides that promote health. So they're basically making the case to a very corporate client, this is why you have to do this. And then they talk about, again, very biophilic rules, the need for refuge and prospect, and the design refuge and prospect in here. The importance of physical activity, so they've designed an active work environment. There is an interesting psychometric plot, for those of you who are into psychometric plots, that looks at the human comfort zone in winter and summer, which doesn't overlap very much, because we wear very different clothing. And then the environment that plants love, and so there's this little sweet spot in here where we're all sort of trying to cohabitate, which is And then selecting the plants, recognizing that the visual environment for plants is different, what they need is different from what humans are sensitive to. And then the space itself is truly an impressive biophilic environment. So I just wanted you to get a sense that I think that the notion of environmental surfing, the notion of biophilia, is absolutely transforming practice, and I think we're beginning to see a desire to design for place, not for international, anywhere it goes anywhere. So the design, this is my closing. The design masters of environmental surfing, they'll preserve, they'll cascade, they'll regenerate nature's abundant resources for sheer delight. They'll create technologies that mimic nature, regenerate without waste, displace design that cuts us off from the environment. The architecture produced by environmental surfing will celebrate the time of day, the seasons, and the culture that is unique to each community and to nature's creative energies, and it is central to a more resilient future. Thanks, guys. So, questions? So I know that there's a few that are part of the dual degree, but ones who are not part of the dual degree, is biophilia talked about in studio at all? Is passive biochromatic design? I know that Anna talks about it.
I think it depends on your professor and if you're interested in bringing it up. Last semester I was interested in it and my professor supported me in that decision, but it might have to be a proactive decision or not.
I have just a question about what I see as kind of a doomsday scenario where biophilia might go, which I'm always worried about, which is when people start to say, oh, but the outside air is so polluted, let's simulate healthy outdoor air inside. Oh, like, daylight's too hard, let's simulate daylight. And even I think to the point that now we're realizing, what is it about seeing plants and images of plants that triggers relaxation? Well, it's these fractals, so let's make super fractals, put them everywhere, and solve that issue. So all of a sudden, you no longer need the real plants, you no longer need preserve the argument that it's something more holistic about cohabiting with nature as opposed to harnessing it for the productivity gains. But I'm afraid that these amazing statistics for health might be able to be achieved separately.
Some of them can, and actually, even pictures of plants do get us 2/3 of the way to the same outcomes that the actual view of plants, right?
Like, how to then, if a picture is $5 to print and a plant wall is $1 million to maintain?
Right. Okay, so those are good questions. First place, there's a lot we don't know about what nature provides. You could see that in the spectral distribution of daylight and every other light source, whether it's LED or whatever. So we literally, there's so much content to daylight, to fresh air, that we really still don't understand. So there's a huge area of study that we're still babies in. Certainly the building profession is just beginning to work in. So I think that we're going to find that nature has a lot more to offer than any mechanical, electrical gadget we could invent. I think there's also a question though of creating the problem and then having to solve it. Right? So if I encapsulate everything in this school of architecture inside the bubble, I have to heat it and cool it. Right? The question is, are we really making sense when we start to work on the notion that I have to have a hermetically sealed, uniform environment? And that's why alliesthesia is coming up. You could mechanically induce alliesthesia. You could basically let the air flow, ebb and flow the way a good fan that modulates would do. You could try to change the temperatures, across the day. But nothing is more stimulating than taking a minute to go outside, right, and coming back in. So, in the U.S., we actually subsidize if you live in the flight path of the Boston airport, you can get state money to seal your windows. Put in high acoustic quality windows, which often are also high thermal quality, which is good, that are sealed because you're in the flight path of the airport. In Austria, they have a completely different attitude, which is we're going to make sure that no trucks go and cars go through after 5 o'clock in the evening and on weekends. So literally, you have a no transport policy. So you basically solve the problem at its source. And I think that's, I think one of the answers to your question is we could mechanically solve, but we first have to define what's the problem. Did we need 500 lux everywhere? What did we actually need, right? And so I think if we can start to look to nature and pull back and let nature provide as much conditioning as we can, we're going to still need high-tech solutions to some of these. I don't know if that completely answers the question. It's a good question.
Just a comment. Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Just a comment on that. I think one of the examples that's fascinating was the last hospital you showed in Singapore, because you could imagine the argument people saying, if the air outside is polluted, how do we do it, But the fact that after that being established for a while, you see the wildlife coming back. You see that it's not just the interior environment that's changing; it's the effect that is having on the exterior, right? That's really interesting. That if it would be really interesting to get the data to see what the change was before and after in the kind of exterior environment of that building. That is the building actually then having this effect on the exterior environment it's in, just because of the benefits it's
It
giving.
is. I mean, it's
Which
certainly
we see
changing
from
the community.
and for the wildlife coming back, that's
Oh,
a
yeah.
sign that the
Right, and-
exterior conditions are enhanced by the building, which is the way we think about buildings typically, right?
And I didn't dwell. I mean, the whole biophilic cities movement is focused more on the ecology side of the equation. Even though there's a huge human factors benefit, there's an even greater. I mean, if we're serious about bees, we need to re-engage. And the built environment is, at this point, we've got almost 80% of what the Europeans call soil sealing in America's cities. In other words, 80% of the ground plane of an American city is sealed with concrete, whether it's the roof of a building or a parking lot or a street and a sidewalk. We literally take, of all the natural surfaces that could absorb water, could provide habitat, and we seal 80% of it. It's a huge percentage of our built environment. And the biophilic cities movement is going to make it clear that and flooding, is going to make it clear we cannot do this. And so I think the built environment is going to play a very different role. It's a really good point. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
Yes, I was in a talk yesterday, and there was an emphasis on gravity producing catenary shapes and structures for not shape making but form finding. My question here are there other influences or forces that could help us find or form finding mechanisms? For example, are there benefits to curvilinear shaped buildings like we saw in BBJ in Seattle? In other words, either for light that shines around or air that, of course, flows in a curvilinear path.
So I thought I had put the slide of see, it must be the whole, this one. So if you ask somebody who calls themselves a sustainability person, some people hate the word sustainable, and other people hate the word green, and people say, well, I'd rather be regenerative, and then certainly the Rockefeller Foundation has decided that we really need to focus on resiliency. So these are sort of the big super words that sort of describe the persona of the designer. But in that, there is a whole bunch of movement that's occurring all over certainly this country and internationally. And one of them, of course, is biomimicry. And the biomimicry movement is absolutely beginning to say, what does nature teach us about the most efficient use of materials, the best way to project light? I mean, if you want to take a light shelf and figure out how to introduce a light shelf that doesn't cause a dark underside, that gives the maximum distance of light into the space, you're going to start crafting. And optics, I mean, nature knows a lot about optics, right? So people will look at mimetic solutions to how light is stretched in nature. And then they will emulate that. And I know that Anna and her team are doing a lot of work in this area. I mean, so there is definitely, I mean, if you really want, I would go look at the whole biomimicry movement. If I was trying to understand how form is generated by natural phenomena or by the very function of materials I'm manipulating, that's the one I would look at. I do think they almost all tend to revolve around innovations in sight, innovations in indoor environmental quality, innovations in water, innovations in energy, innovations in materials, innovations in social equity. I think that those are the big categories, but there is a lot of movement that's going on around the world that is transforming practice in sustainability.
This is not only a question, but more of a comment. I'm just thinking, and of all these things that are listed here, there's not a huge emphasis on environmental stewardship from a civilian point of view, and I think maybe there is like I was just thinking about shift and the difference between the view to actual nature versus the view to a small group within view of nature, and it's the idea of empathy towards the nature itself, that you're much more closer, and I feel like there's a tendency to care more about what it is that the environment means. And it's different between big picture versus small picture. I think that's how you think that plays into the way LEED and other civil institutions do codes and laws. That was a very good question.
Yeah, I do think LEED is a very important standard. But to me, it's a baseline under which all buildings should have to prove themselves. It's not a REACH standard. I do think certainly in the water area, if you look at the work of Herbert Dreiser's, managing water and designing around water is a whole design objective in and of itself, and it's very much about understanding the very resources that we rely on. I mean, water is certainly one of the most important resources we have. So I do think that there are amazing players that have dramatically shifted some of these into environmental stewardship. I mean, particularly energy conservation is an environmental stewardship. If we don't stop what we're doing, right? I mean, our carbon footprint is a huge problem, and I think we're seeing with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we're seeing literally every nation in the world has signed on to benchmark, to baseline their carbon footprint and to set goals and show every year where they've gone against their goals, except for right now the United States, who has withdrawn from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, but everyone else has signed on. So I think we're definitely seeing through the UN, we're seeing absolutely a different objective. And the question is, what role does the built environment play on that? Number one, we should stop doing 80% soil sealing. We shouldn't be sealing the very sort of lungs and digestive system of nature. Literally, it'd be like pouring concrete down your digestive tract. Like, really bad idea.
I guess I'm just curious, and maybe this is more of a question just for all of us here who are starting our careers in trying to affect the built environment in some way, whether that's through architecture or getting involved in one of these. If you were starting out at our age and you had this menu in front of you here, it seems like every one of these is a career, right? Like you could make a career out of net zero water. You could dedicate your life to red list materials and healthy materials. As an architect, how do you move forward being aware of these things, but realizing that you can't possibly become an expert in all of them?
So, number one, I think you guys should practice. I think there's so many decisions that are made in the built environment, and the sustainability leaders, are not doing enough. we need to get our graduates out there and affecting change in the built environment and show people how spectacular a solution is if you drive it from a different set of goals and objectives. We were talking about this before. It is absolutely about collaboration. I mean, I would hire biohabitats. I would hire Transolar. I was going to set up practice today. I would basically go after projects where the client is committed. I would find there are actually construction firms that are cutting edge in this, and I would basically build my team. And then I would go after projects. We would, whether it's competitions or just getting the name out there saying, just create a whole new collaboration of people who do cover this area, right? And then say, okay, now we're a team. We could be a virtual team. And let's go after, because this client has said, so the United Nations say we're going to build a new office in Rwanda. Okay, now you want to go right there and say, okay, these are your goals. This is the only team that we know that's capable of delivering huge leaps, right? And you need to go after them. So that's what I would do if I were starting out. Now I know a lot more than I did when I left college. But I do think it's all about collaboration. And I think we have to get over the notion that the architect is, I'm okay with the notion of the architect being a conductor of a huge orchestra. I'm sort of okay with that. But the architect is a critical player. So it's like you being the piano player and the conductor at the same time. So I'm more interested in the notion of this collaborative team. And it takes years for teams to be cohesive partners, right? For the longest time, you're just talking to each other, trying to understand, you're just speaking the same language. And once you start to really coalesce, then all of a sudden you have huge power. I think that's what we're beginning to see when you start to see certain players show up on these projects. They've formed teams that have now begun to really make incredible music because they now all speak the same language. Yeah.
And you talk about sort of like the way that these clients who are really on board, those clients exist, but for a lot of these things to make kind of real impacts, especially when you talk about something like climate, you need just sort of like a lot of projects happening,
Yeah.
So how do you see this stuff sort of like scaling in sort of like meaningful ways beyond it being sort of like this big project here or this big project there, to really reshape the built environment?
So those two biophilic hospitals in Singapore, that was very gutsy for Singapore to say, sure, let's just do 75% natural ventilation. Although historically they only had naturally ventilated hospitals, so it wasn't such a leap for them. But they had been driving towards sealed, air-conditioned, hire American teams to design the American hospital in downtown Singapore, and now they were starting saying, wait a minute, is this really what we want to do? So those two hospitals have been catalytic. So Kaiser Permanente in California has said, you know what, let's look at this. Sweden has a series of new hospitals, and so there are hospitals, Mass Architects, and there's some very interesting projects that have emerged. So I think projects can be catalytic. I think they can change the face. If Kaiser actually found that their outcomes in their naturally ventilated hospitals, because they will build a landmark hospital, if they find their outcomes exceed their other outcomes, it's like a tipping point, right? And I guess I'm an optimist. I think there are tipping points. But beautiful projects make a difference, and then measured outcomes.
Why does it take something like sick building syndrome for the codes to change, though? With this incredibly powerful data that you presented, like with such incredible clarity, these graphs, where you have these jumps, for example, unbelievable. Why would they not mandate at least the code change to operable windows?
Oh, well, operable windows is a tough one. ASHRAE has made changes. I'm pretty impressed because ASHRAE now champions dedicated outside air. That's a big change. They've doubled the ventilation rate again, so that's a big change.
But through mechanical.
Through mechanical. They are supporting aesthetic, adaptive comfort, right? So ASHRAE has made changes, which is impressive.
Yeah, I feel like the operable windows is shocking.
It's going to be a real fight.
Because they unbalance the HVAC, basically. Is that one of the
So I've been trying to build the arguments on the resiliency side. When New Orleans was, when Katrina happened, if you look at the data, deaths in hospitals during Katrina, those hospitals were sealed. And actually, the medical community abandoned the hospitals. They left in cars. And patients were literally lying in beds. And there was no air, right? I mean, there's no power, there was no mechanical system. And ultimately, I mean, it was hot. So it would a question of how much you would be able to survive even if you could open windows. But it was clear that the inability to open windows led to deaths. And I think, we're looking at heat waves, power outages. Actually, I'm sort of glad when there's a power outage because it just sort of, so I think resiliency might be the arm that forces us to think about windows that open. I love the architecture where the walls just roll away, slide left and right, lift, literally, and it changes the street. When you have a restaurant where the entire wall goes, not only does it change the restaurant, it changes the street. And they become very popular destinations. And the wall is only open, when you add it all up, maybe 2.5 months, right? If you add it all up, it depends on the day, in the afternoon, and the wall's open. But 2.5 months, that's a lot of natural conditioning. So I think we are beginning to crave community. So another reason to get windows that open is to be engaged in communal settings. So I don't know. I'm always looking at my sort of 2 life goals. One is to make sure that we have daylight autonomy in all buildings, so you can't build a fat building anymore, and the other is to get windows that open. It's going to be a life goal. I've got. It should be written into the code, right? Anyway, well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you taking the time. Right?
A very quick plug to those of you